I want to tell a story. I don't know if I should, but there was a really good friend of mine years ago who's in the hobby for about 2 years, and he built a really cool collection. And it got to the point that every waking second he was just doing the hobby. A lot of times when people say, they talk about the hobby, it's like take it in small doses. Small doses. Don't go too overboard. And so this guy basically got to a point where his significant other said, "Hey, it's either me or the hobby." And so the sad part about the story is he actually sold all of his collection, and at the end, his significant other left him as well.
All right, welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 7 of the NextGen TCG podcast. Lucky number 7. I'm Tetra Ninja, also known as Nick, and as you can probably tell, we have John here, PokeRadar, as my co-host, but not actually. We actually have Zack. He's in a very special place. If you guys are familiar with the PokeRadar podcast, which you should be because it's a great podcast, you probably know that the setting is very similar, if not exact, to John's setup because Zack is actually at John's house right now.
It's so cool to be here. I'm just surrounded by trophy cards. I wish I could show you. It's like 1,000 trophy cards just all over the room. It's like a palace or like a heaven of Pokemon. It's so cool.
Every kid's dream.
Dude, it's so cool. So John is very gracious enough to let us film from his apartment this week. I was traveling a little bit, and the schedules were kind of tight. So he has an awesome setup, and I can't wait to just hop in and do a little what do you call it when you do something somewhere else?
Remote?
Yeah, remote. We're working remote this week.
You're always remote. You're always traveling everywhere because you're actually at another conference this week. You're at the Kansas City Collecticon. So since you do this so often, you go a lot of places and you go to a lot of these events. I'm always wondering because I've never been to one of these events before. Like, when you go to these events, do you have like a plan set out of like goals of what you want to accomplish at the event? Like what's the purpose of you going to these types of things?
Most of the time when you go to the event, like for me, it's always about the relationships and the people. And so there's always these things that happen in the hobby. When you're not at the event, when you come to the event, you can really put two and two together, or you can kind of either find more inventory. A lot of times you'll go around to different vendor booths and try to buy. And what's crazy is, as active as the hobby is, a lot of the vendor booths actually recycle all their inventory each event. So you're not looking at stale inventory at each Collecticon, which is kind of awesome. And then with the relationships, obviously there's trade night in the hotel room every night, in the hotel lobby, I should say. And so pretty much right when the event closes at 6, from 6 p.m. to like 3 a.m., you just have hordes and hordes of people bringing out the best stuff, just doing wheeling and dealing the whole time. It's literally like a Pokemon dream.
What's the biggest deal that you ever closed at one of these events?
I will say there was a deal at Kansas City Collecticon. A lot of people have been a pretty big fan of some waifus lately. Have you heard of a card called Battle Day Lily?
No, I have never heard of this card before.
One of those closed at Kansas City Collecticon for $100,000. That happened at Kansas City Collecticon, and the guy had an offer for $110,000 before the event was over. Like,
oh my god,
holy cow! Like, I took a photo of him with the card, and hopefully we can share that. But he made the Lily pose. I guess she has like a pose or something, and he showed me the card, and I was like, oh, that's cool, Lily. He's like, yeah, it's a Battle Day Lily one. I was like, oh my gosh, like it didn't ring right away that was like the card. I've never held one, so big things happen. It's crazy how active the hobby is, man.
What about you? Do you close any big deals though?
I've done some big deals. A lot of times, a big deal. Sometimes I'll take care of ahead of time, and then at the event we'll exchange like the cards, this and that. So the card of I don't want to jump to the card of the week, but it was a big deal. You just kind of pick up here and there. But a lot of times with the events and stuff, like even going to Worlds, like I've already prearranged like 3 or 4 things that I want to happen at Worlds before we even get there, because it's so chaotic. There's always so many things happening. You only have so much time. That you have to basically plan ahead. So,
yeah, I like that idea of like preemptive, like just in principle have the deal. Like especially if you're talking like a 6-figure card, just have like the deal in place. That way, you can just in person hand the person the card. You don't have to worry about shipping it overnight via FedEx. stuff like that, getting tied up at customs or just tied up at the post office for no odd reason. That way, there's like some people do contracts, like when they receive the card, they sign the contract saying that they received the card. It is in the condition that they accept it, and there's basically no problems. So I like the idea of actually like going to an event. My biggest thing is like anytime like if I ever decide to like sell like a big card, like a six-figure card or anything like that, um, that I would just bite the bullet and just pay the flights in Canada. Like once you cross that border, astronomical, astronomical. You're just paying like when you cross the border from the U.S. to from Canada to the U.S. It's like at least a minimum $6,000 to $1,000 flight, depending on the day of the week. I know you guys fly within the U.S. pretty economically and pretty affordably, but for us Canadians, once we cross the border, the price just jumps. But when you're talking about like a six-figure card, I will just like hand deliver that myself if I have to. I know that like a person in our hobby, Colors, it's been in the hobby for a while. He sold off his first entire first edition collection, PSA 10 WotC, and he drove. I think he said that he publicly said this, so I'm not in the wrong, but he sold it for like 250 grand. This is before the gigantic spike of the Zard happened, before Gary started selling Zards to Jimmy BC and Logan Paul and all that type of stuff. Now like 250 probably just gets you the Zard by itself in most cases. But anyways, he like drove all. He said that he literally hand delivered that first edition set like all the way to California. I think he lives in like Illinois. So that's so yeah. It's all about just like when you're talking about like items of that value, just like mitigating risks. And like if it for me spending $1,000 to hop in a plane to sell $100,000 card, that's just what you need to do business. That's the price of doing business these days. And I think I would just, and also for my anxiety levels, that's the price of just keep my anxiety levels low at the same time. It's just, yeah. But yeah.
So imagine getting that Lily and then flying back to Canada with it in your pocket.
No, I would never spend 100 grand on a battle lily. So you said like your biggest value that you get out of these events is just the meeting everyone in the hobby and like interacting with them, having fun. So you actually posted a very interesting short that interesting story on Instagram the other day that I got to see. You were with Cloud TCG, and I want to bring attention to the button on your shirt that was hanging on for absolute dear life. I felt like one more drink and that button was like hitting the floor, and you're full on going like Hawaii aloha with that shirt. So tell me what was going on in that scene.
Yeah, Cloud has a tendency to unbutton a few, then I have to button them back up before everyone notices what's going on. So at some distinct point, late in the night, some hour, just after the bars close, just some point, we were doing what most gamblers do at Collecticon is they gamble, and what a better way to gamble than to do a good old classic coin flip. And so it's like, the way that they pitched it is like, oh, it's better odds than casino. It's 50-50, it's like, okay, sure. And so people like literally get in a circle and flip a coin, and they bet amount of money. And a lot of people are doing $100 here, $100 there, and going back and forth. And sometimes they just kind of ramp it up a little bit. And let's just say this is the very end of the night after quite a long day. And there was a big coin flip that happened, and I won the coin flip. So Cloud was not very happy at all. So
just a bunch of degenerates, man. Degenerate gamblers.
I do not condone doing that whatsoever, but it was with good friends, and at the end of the night we were all basically about even, and Cloud was struggling.
Yeah, those events they get kind of rowdy, especially I go to a lot of like video game events, and video game developers and publishers, they drink like fish, man. They know how to go after it. And, I have like a couple of embarrassing stories that I'll share another day about like the biggest trouble that I've ever gotten in an event, but we'll
The
save that for
tease.
a tease. We'll save that for another day. Just one thing that we also wanted to talk on is as well, based on our questions of the week. Last week, someone asked like what collaborations that we wanted to do if with Pokemon, and one of your answers was that KFC should actually do a Pokemon collaboration. And we actually didn't know this, but this actually happened in the early stages of when Pokemon hit North America. They actually did like a promo where they were giving away or selling Beanie Babies of the weirdest choices of Pokemon that I've ever seen before. I think there was like a seal, a Zubat. Like,
Oh my gosh.
who wants a Zubat Beanie Baby?
I mean, it's a super popular Pokemon in the game. I mean, how many times you run into a Zubat in the cave?
But yeah, lots of things going on. You go to a lot of these events. What's the next major event, anyways?
Oh man, there's so many events going on. It's unreal. I mean, I was literally at Heritage this morning picking up playmat that I bought at their last auction. It was like a TMB playmat where it's like three playmats all combined. It's super long. It's like 8 feet long. And then I dropped off all my error cards at CGC a couple weeks ago. Like 200 error cards that have been sitting on a while. And so I'm actually going there probably when this podcast goes live to pick them up. Super stoked to see that. And then next week, there's the National, the sports card show. And what's crazy about the National is it's literally the largest card show in the year by far. Like there's no card show that comes close to it. It's at the Donald D. Stevens Convention Center in Rosemont, which is basically right outside Chicago, like between O'Hare Airport and Chicago. And the weird part about it is it's only like 2% Pokemon or like 5% Pokemon. It's a very, very small amount of Pokemon. So if you go there, like as a Pokemon collector, you might find some sports card dealers that don't know what they have, or maybe they want to do a deal or this or that. Like there's some opportunity, but there's really not a lot. But it's the biggest card show by far, and like you can't even comprehend because when you walk in the venue, it's just like it looks like a mile, like maybe more than a mile of just vendor tables, like 20 wide, like a 500 tables deep, and then there's multiple rooms, this and that. And I heard that this year they actually rented out the entire space. So I guess they haven't rented out the entire space in the past. So I'm going to go there, and their PSA is going to have a dinner on Friday night. And I don't know if I've shared this yet, but PSA actually inducted me into the Set Registry Hall of Fame, which is kind of a pretty big honor. And
Of course.
they told me
you own everything.
well, I feel like we're always celebrating something. It feels weird because like I'm just like, hey, I'm just a collector. I started like a year before you, or I started 2 years before you. Like I feel like I think the same, act the same as like everyone else I meet at shows and this and that. But PSA told me it's the first Pokemon person they've actually put in the Hall of Fame, which I didn't even know was like possible. So um, anything we can do to move the hobby forward, anything we can do to make Pokemon more aware and kind of bring people into it, I think is a net positive. And one of our good friends, Peter Pettypass, he's actually getting in the set Registry Hall of Fame for Yu-Gi-Oh! He's their first Yu-Gi-Oh! Person. So he and I were kind of talking a little bit, and I said, hey, why don't we show up in suits, man? Like, why don't we represent the hobby well? Let's go in blazers, looking good, all tailored out, and say, get all the sports card guys. I want them to look at Pokemon and like say, oh man, those guys know what they're doing. Like respect, it's like show respect for the event, the venue, and I think we just want to keep serving the hobby the best way we can.
That's amazing, Zach. Big congratulations on your accomplishments. One of many accomplishments that you have done and will continue to do. You do great things for this hobby. So big congratulations to you, sir.
Thanks, man. I literally just can't wait to see the next 10 Pokemon people to get in there. It's like I just feel like it's surprising, wasn't expecting it. But at this point, it's like, let's get more in there. Let's get more in there. Like I'm lucky and I feel awesome that it's happening. But how do we get like more Pokemon people there? How can we fill that room full of Pokemon people? It's like the future of card collecting is literally like anime and like Pokemon and all these other TCGs that are out there, NextGen TCG. And it's like, how do we fill that room full of like card collectors? And so I think that'd be an awesome goal to have. Just be publicly recognized in a forum where there is like some historical, prevalence there and stuff.
So that's happening in Chicago in a couple weeks.
Next week in Chicago.
So I'm going to call this out. Chicago, great city. Loved my time going there. O'Hare is the biggest gong show of an airport that I have ever been to in my entire life. Anytime I go to any event and they try to fly me through O'Hare, I just flat out shut that down really quickly just because I hate that airport. With I anytime that I had like an issue with my bag getting lost or my flights getting delayed or I'm missing connection, it's always through O'Hare. I hate that airport so much. It's because like like your layover is like only like an hour, and then like the airport's so big, it takes you at least like 50 minutes to like get to the other side of the airport. It's I hate that airport in
Uh,
it all what being. It's something about Chicago and O'Hare. I absolutely hate it. But congratulations on your accomplishments, and let's move into a market trends. So one of the more interesting things that we've been kind of tracking, just because of the whole CGC regrading scale and transitioning to 9.5 to 10, we've been kind of monitoring how CGC auctions on 10s on more kind of, I would say, elusive cards to get in PSA 10. When we talk about WotC, we're talking about, we saw a lot of Neo Genesis big cards get auctioned this week, and we also saw a CGC 10 Shadowless Zard as well. So I'm just going to go over a couple of these prices. So we have the Neo Gen First Edition Slow King finishing off at $1,825. We have the Neo Genesis Lugia PSA 10 CGC First Edition, finishing off at 17,685. The one of the bigger ones and more interesting ones that I was watching was the T17 Typhlosion, that finished off at 6,800, but unfortunately that one ended up not being paid for, so it ended up being relisted with a reserve price of basically $6,000.
I mean, yeah, I mean, just kind of quick point there. I think reserves kill auctions. I really do. And I've got that feedback from a lot of people that either work at auction houses, run auction houses, or have auction cards themselves for years. Anytime you do like a reserve or a limit, or you start the price at like a high price, there's a lot of buyers that basically don't participate. And there's a lot of theory that goes into that, but just kind of, I guess, to keep this short and sweet, I would highly recommend against a reserve if you choose the auction. There's a likelihood it would go lower
Mm-hmm.
than a no reserve.
So then finally, the biggest card out of this lot was the CGC 10 Shadow Zard, finishing at just under 28,000. So what are your overall thoughts of the prices that we saw with this first wave of CGC 10s hitting the market?
I mean, I think we're all very curious where they're going to price at, like where the CGC 10s are going to sort of, cement themselves in the hobby. Last week we talked about how, like, for a first edition PSA 9 Charizard, it's probably around that like $19,000 price point. And then, but the PSA 10s like 200, 250, kind of depends on sort of the day of the week or the market. There was a buy it now sell in PWCC last week for 250. And then there's been some private deals kind of sort of a little bit lower than that. And so it's like, the Zard can't just be this or that. There has to be some wiggle room in the middle. And when you have the BGS 9.5, the BGS 10, when you have the CGC 9.5, the new CGC 10, and the Pristine 10, it's like they should be kind of somewhere in between. And I think we're all very curious if things are going to lie. So the market is kind of saying, hey, there is a middle ground. There is a gap there. We mentioned earlier the Pristine, 10 CGC went for like that 63 mark after buyer's premium. I'd say roughly a shadowless PSA 10 Zards around like 70, 75K right now. There's been a couple sales at the 80K mark privately, then the public sales around 62, 65-ish or so. And so the PSA 9 has been very consistent with that 4,000 to like 5,000 price point, depending on how strong it is. And so for the CGC 10 to come in at $27,000, that is a very strong price point. And I think the market's saying like, yeah, there is a gap there. We want to be somewhere in between. And whether that sustains or, I think a lot of people think that people are just going to dump their CGC 10s and there'll probably be a short-term dip. But I think long-term, people like 10s. People like seeing a 10 on their grade. And, keep in mind, a gem mint card isn't a perfect card. There is, the black label. There was the CGC perfect. And a gem mint card isn't necessarily a pristine grade either. The gem mint basically means it meets the parameters in the grading scale sort of a 10. So again, a PSA 10, it could be a perfect card. It could also maybe have a minor flaw that still meets the criteria for a PSA 10. So I think the hobby's getting smart. The hobby kind of knows what to look for. The average collector like knows to go to 130 point to see the best offers that are out there. The average collector knows how to look at the pop report. The average collector knows, if I have the cert number on this one cert, I can go look at the rest of that guy's order and see how many other good grades he got or how many bad grades he got. And so it's just so cool to see like the hobby just kind of continue to grow and flourish over the years.
That is next level can't be card sleuthing, man. No one sleuths more in this hobby than Mason does, but he's
Camps
really
cards.
he's really good at it. But just kind of bring it back, like I think both of us can pretty much like in terms of tier, we people ask this all the time. Black Label obviously at the top. Then we're gonna see the Pristine 10s. Then we're gonna see PSA 10. Then we're gonna see CGC 10.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, how I think the majority of the hobby will agree, like in terms of pricing tier, how things are gonna eventually work out. Disagree, agree.
I agree. I mean, I think the CGC Pristine 10 may at some point have a premium to PSA 10. I think it depends on how many are given out. And so if it's still a really hard grade to get, then I think it'll have some sort of premium. If all of a sudden the Pristine 10s become like 5% or 10% of the pop report or something that you just see more frequently, because again, a lot of the highest end collectors, they still like the PSA 10s. They still want the PSA 10 Charizard. That's, Gary from Pawn Stars, King Pokemon. He's got the 10, first ed base 10 Zards and just showing all that off. It's like there's so much branding and marketing. And that Pawn Stars shows like 15 million views, by the way. And so as long as like the market reinforces that, it's going to be tough to break. But if it gets to a point where the Pristine 10s are like 2% and like if a Black Label Zard ever showed up from BGS, like I literally think that could set records, man.
That was literally my next question that I was gonna have for you. Like, if by some miracle,
Mm-hmm.
someone opens a booster box because they do, not recommended, basically in this day and age to open a first edition booster box unless you get 3 Charizards out of it, like Gary does, and they all grade 10. And in some miracle, one slips through, and you have the perfect Black Label. What does that sell for?
The BGS 10 Black Label.
Yeah, BGS 10 Black Label. What is?
Everyone wants PSA. I think if you were to auction it, I think it would go maybe around 800,000, and I think that would be low as like a low auction price. I think if you really got the right players involved, if Gary kind of followed through on his, any other BGS 10 Pristine, so one level below Black Label, if that ever came out, he has an active $1 million offer on that card. I think you get some of the big celebrities, and I think you get some of the key players that probably want to dip in the market as well. I mean, keep in mind, like Logan Paul paid $5.2 million for a PSA 10 Illustrator that everyone knows was a 9 that was graded like 5 times. Like there's no secret to that. That's widely known and accepted hobby knowledge. And so that was $4 million cash and 9 Illustrators, so right around 1.2. So again, he put $4 million cash into that. I mean, it could break 2 million. I mean, it could really jump up, but it's really just people with a lot of money trying to prove who has more money at that point. So what do you think? What do you think it would go for, man?
I like the number 3.
$3 million?
I like 3 as a number because think about it, man. We're like 30 years into this. There's only been, I'd realistically say only 2 real BGS 10s. I don't.
Ooh.
The Logan Paul one, I'm not gonna go into that, but 3
shots fired.
I would say really 2 real BGS 10s, and in 30 years, and you have to think of you have to think also I know this isn't a BGS 10, but like the PSA 9 pop report of Charizards, like how many of those have been regraded? Like people trying to get that 10, right? It's just like print quality wasn't the greatest back then, so and you're at that point you're just talking about people with FU money, and you're talking about the cross collectors who just want the best out of the absolute best, and like just even like some people, the person who's going to buy this is going to be everywhere. Like they will be on every magazine. They will have their like 15 minutes of fame on every news outlet. And we talked about this before. You can't buy viral. Well, I guess in this case you could, but even you can't guarantee it. But like, I personally myself, you know me, I'm like a very conservative guy.
Yeah.
I feel like 3 is a number that I would go with. So yeah, we'll continue monitoring the CGC auctions. I saw a couple of more WotC stuff of Pristines, just kind of sitting at high buy it nows above the
Mhm.
premium PSA 10. It'll be really interesting to see when more of these pristine start hitting the market and get to actual auctions, and you'll basically force a sale like we talked about last week, and we'll see what the market decides on what the prices of these things are going to be, because it's really interesting. It's a beautiful label. There's really nothing like it right now. In terms of just like that aesthetic gold. Obviously, the black label, it's so hard to get though. You're not going to see a lot of black labels out on the market. So those pristine labels are just fantastic. So I'm really interested to see how this all plays out at the very end.
So, getting up to our main topic of the week, it's actually card addictions, something that I feel like is not talked about in the hobby all that often. I have to give a major shout out to Millhouse, a good friend and fellow E4 mod, who recommended the topic this week and actually kind of built it out a little bit as well too. So, when it comes to card addictions and different things that people don't talk about, is essentially we love the hobby. We obviously have a passion for it. There's a lot of upside and a lot of benefits from buying, selling, and growing your collection sort of through these things, and it can be addictive. Opening a pack is a gamble. Let alone like mystery boxes or all the other things that are out there, or coin flip, or I wouldn't know anything about that, but but it's basically like there's this pressure to engage, and there's this with Instagram, there's this pressure to, hey, I got this cool card, I want to show off, I want to, you constantly want to be active in the hobby, and oh, you have a goal and you're chasing that goal, and all your friends are rooting for you, and like, you want to go get that card. But at the same time, for a lot of people out there, the hobby is a portion of your life. I have my real life friends that I spend a lot of time with, go to the bars, and I may go on a trip with, and then I have a lot of Pokemon friends I see at the events and stuff. Everyone's welcome to come over, this and that. But you kind of have these other segments that are important. You may have a significant other, you may have children at home, you have bills to pay, or a house, or you have other priorities in life. And this card addiction is kind of just fueling the nostalgia and fueling the piece that you want to just participate. And sometimes people leave the casino broke. Sometimes people don't have a ride home from Vegas. It's a very, I think it's a topic that needs to be talked about. And it's something that we need to bring to light. And so, Tetra, any kind of just like when you hear card addiction, like what's the first thing that kind of comes to your mind?
I play like, because as a video game person, loot boxes obviously was very prevalent for a while. They've actually kind of died down as of recently. I think this is mostly coming from a lot of pressure from governments as well to not allow younger children to play games with loot boxes. There's some legislation being tabled in like Australia and those types of things. So you don't hear about them as much, but there's there's an inherent joy in opening a loot box. That's why anytime you buy a loot box in a video game, there's always this fantastical thing, lots of explosions, lots of colors, the anticipation, trying to hit those dopamine levels in your brain. These video game developers have brought it down to down to a science of what they need to do to make it satisfying to open a loot box. But like TCG, it's always been like this. So I don't know why we governments are going after like video games when basically Pokemon has been doing it and TCGs have been doing it for several decades now. It's kind of a weird separation between the two, which are basically the exact same thing. I've always like in terms of like loot boxes and stuff like that, and like opening TCGs. My philosophy has always been if a new set comes out, I just buy one booster box, and then if I'm doing a binder, I will just piece out and buy everything myself, one card at a time, just online. Don't go into like the gamble of I'm gonna buy 10 booster boxes to open unless you're selling bulk. Obviously, if you're like selling 99-cent cards like our friend Nick, old school Pokemon, then have at it. But if you're just like trying to chase a specific card, there's no like, although there's like probability and stuff, there's no guarantee that you're gonna get a specific card that you want. What
Yeah,
do you think?
I mean, to kind of dive in that further, you talked a little bit about Australia. I remember a couple years ago, there was like Facebook groups in Australia that were shut down, basically because they were doing like the live auctions or this or that, or they had or mystery or there's something going on where like it needed to be like approved or just regulated further. And you got to keep in mind a lot of these sort of activities out there, if we kind of dive into that section, they're not regulated. You literally have to trust the person who's doing it. Are they going to random.org? Are they spinning three times? Or are you sure it's not just like a flash website of the random.org that's fake? Or, just what have you. And so, like, there's a major like ethics piece to it as well too, and is the integrity and stuff there. But with we could probably dive into that more in like a later sort of episode. But if we stick to the addiction part of it, it's like, well, why do you want to buy that slot? Why do you want to, hop into that auction? The auction's coming down. It's 5 minutes left. It's 1 minute left. 30 seconds left. I need this card. 20 seconds left. You type the bid in. 10 seconds left. Oh no, the bid's not big enough. Then you raise the bid a little bit. You hit buy. Then all of a sudden you win it for your max bid. And you're like, oh, why couldn't it have been lower? Why couldn't it have just been one bid higher? Why is it always the max bid you win things for? And then you got to pay for it. And you look at your bank account. You're like, oh man, credit card's a little tight. Uh-oh, you don't have money. And so it's like you get in this constant cycle of like stressing yourself and this and that. And some people are very good at doing it sort of, the right way, and, doing everything sort of like not sort of, they kind of have different levels for things or budgets, this and that. And they never sort of cut it too close. But there are a lot of people that cut it kind of close. They run the credit cards up. They're paying the monthly interest. And I think that's who I think some of this is going to speak to is really the addiction side of it. How do you take the addict out of it? How do you make the hobby fun and enjoyable without all this pressure to, oh, I have to sell a collection card? And you never want to be in a position where you have to sell a collection card. You always want to just keep the hobby enjoyable and fun. And I want to tell a story. I don't know if I should, but there was a really good friend of mine years ago who's in the hobby for about 2 years. I'm not going to say his name out of respect, but he loved the hobby more than anyone. I mean, he spent so much money on different cards. He didn't have a job that sort of that you would think would allow him to do that. And he built a really, really cool collection. And it got to the point that every waking second he was just doing the hobby. A lot of times when people say, they talk about the hobby, it's like, take it in small doses, small doses. Don't go too overboard or you're just going to explode. And so this guy basically got to a point where his significant other said, hey, it's either me or the hobby. And so the sad part about the story is he actually sold all of his collection. And at the end, his significant other left him as well. And so he ended up moving, just going, doing something else and kind of exploring life and trying to reinvent himself. But it was kind of literally the addiction of the hobby kind of took all these different things in his life, and it sort of crumbled him. And so I know if you're struggling out there with addiction, or if you're struggling out there with gambling, there's resources to help. But just don't go through it alone. And the Pokemon hobby is so positive. Literally, like everyone's here to help. And so just don't bear through that stuff on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like the best thing to understand and the best way to go about making sure that you're just financially responsible is it's a budget. Like we talked about it last week. When you and me bid on an auction, we have a price in our mind. We have a sniping tool that will automatically put our bid into it. I put like my absolute max that I want. If that bid's at the last second, and then if I win it, I win it. If I don't win it, I'm not going to pay any more than I'm comfortable paying. And just knowing exactly how much you have allocated for the month or allocated for the year to spend on collectibles is something that everyone should do, not in just Pokemon, but basically budgeting in life as well. And just like as well, like when we that's just a really sad, like I'm just thinking about that story you just told me. That's like such a sad story. I couldn't like I can't even like wrap my head around just like losing your significant other over a hobby. It's just like
I think they were married.
Oh my god. Remember that there's so many cards in the hobby, and I know like when you talk about like more obscure items like trophy cards, error cards that you don't see a lot, just keep in mind. But if you're just like a person who's just trying to build out a collection, like there's so many levels. You have your raw, you can do binders. Do you really need that PSA 10 card? Well, a PSA 9 card suffice based on prices these days. That's probably where the majority of people are with PSA 9s. Don't chase a card just because you want to be able to say, I own this PSA 10 card now for clout, basically, so you can post on Instagram. And obviously, social media is so addicting. Like you talked about, like a lot of people, when you like achieve a goal, you get that initial rush of congratulations and getting those comments of people being happy for you. That that in itself is very rewarding, getting that clout. But you have to keep in mind that clout will be short lived once that interest payment on your visa comes in and is just accruing yearly. So just be responsible and know how much you're willing to spend.
Yeah, I think even like in person, I think sometimes there's pressure to do a deal, or there's pressure to do things, and I always like to say, just take a breather, walk away, come back, and sometimes you're doing a deal, you just want to do a trade, and sometimes you just want to do a trade just to do something. You just want to be active, and you want that deal. You're chasing that rush. You're chasing that new card, and if you look at the two items side by side, which item do you want more? Do you want your card or their card? Like that's the easiest way to kind of keep yourself from doing it, and you're talking earlier about the PSA 10 Charizard. Like, there's so many things people are like, this is the only chance, this is the only time I can get it. Like you have this tremendous sort of FOMO, which is fear of missing out. And so you think if you don't get it now, you'll never get it. And a lot of times I like to think, how rare is a card? Like is it truly low pop? Is it easy to get? If I wanted to buy this card 3 years in the future, if I had a lot of money, could I do it? And so it's like, if it's a money issue, like just wait in the future and get it in the future. But if it's like literally there's only 5 of this card, if I don't get it today, I can't get it, then maybe it's a little more justified. So I guess Tetra, when it comes to fear of missing out or FOMO, has there ever been a time where you felt pressure to make a decision, or maybe you paid a little more, or are there any decisions you regret due to FOMO?
Talked about last week, I really wish I would have sold off some cards to buy that Trophy Kang or that number 3 PK for 30,000. But me just paying straight cash for those cards was not on the table whatsoever. So in order to have done that, I would have had to sell pieces of my collection to fund those purchases. And then at that time, I was just wagering, like, what do I value more? Like, we talked about the 2 piles that you talked about. Do I want this pile, the pile that I have, or do I want this pile? And at the end of the day, I just, based on the fact that I wasn't very experienced selling things and I still valued the stuff in my collection, those are probably the 2 things that I missed out on most of. But there was no way for me, I wasn't going to put it all on my credit card. I wasn't going to go into debt to buy these cards. I would have just required a little bit of more work on my end to figure it out. But yeah, definitely, if I were to say if there's a quote unquote FOMO section or a FOMO part of my history in the TCG, that's probably those 2 cards. But I'm still very happy of where my collection is at this point, and even though I missed out on those cards, I am perfectly content with the state of my collection the way it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think you built a great collection, and I think a lot of times, you see the big card and you're not sure, and this and that. Like I remember there were people that were always unsure on the first ed base Zard. Like, oh, it's 5K, it's so much. Oh, it's 10K. Like it was just 5K. Like, why would I pay 10K? It makes no sense. And I've had like 10 conversations about people about 10K. It's like, yeah, it's kind of high. Like it's probably like an 8K card. The next thing you know, it's 30, and it was like at 30 for like a little while. But the key is, I promise you, I promise you, I promise you, the card you want will still be there. It'll still be for sale. It'll still be available. The price may change a little bit, but if you're going to put yourself in a tough position or bad position, the stress that comes with that is not worth like owning that card a little bit earlier. Like a little. I feel like we're always like trying to trick ourselves into things, this and that. Sometimes I'll say, oh, in the future, like I'll be super rich, I can afford anything, so I'll just wait till that. It's like, rather than trying to put yourself in a, got to figure out how to pay rent. It's like don't put yourself in that position. And a lot of times the cards, you see the Moonbryon like jump up, and you're like, I really want that Moonbryon, that PSA 10. I can't do the 9. I've got all the other EVs in a 10. They're much more affordable, and it's like it's going for, I'm just gonna say like 2K or 2,500. I'm just kind of, or I guess the English is maybe like 1,000. I gotta remember the Japanese versus English prices here, but I promise you, a lot of times vintage card collectors, when we are like, oh my gosh, modern prices don't make sense. Like for that price, I get this card, or for that price, I get this card. It's we understand that when a card price shoots up that high, it's not sustainable. Like, and the reason it's not sustainable is because, one, the card just came out, it has a lot of attention, it has a lot of eyes, everyone wants it now. In the future, maybe it's not the case, is because there's so many other options. There's so many better options. And a lot of times the better options are just ones that people aren't aware of. It's me not knowing about trophy cards in 2015 because I just didn't collect as a kid. I had no desire to collect it. I knew they were out there, but I didn't really care what they were or anything about them. And so when you see the things shoot up, just know that it's very hard to sustain that price across the entire pop report. If every PSA 10 Moonbreon came for sale at that price, I don't know. Market price probably comes down a little bit. So just the one parting piece of advice is the card will be there. It's okay to wait.
Absolutely, especially when there's nicer cards out there, like the OG New Discovery Umbreon. Where's the value? As our good friend Ketchum Collectibles likes to remind us. There's one other darker side of the hobby that I kind of want to touch on very briefly, and that is Raffles, the bane of all things in this hobby, which really goes to kind of like target some of the more desperate people in the hobby. We talked about the gambling addiction. I remember when I was entering the hobby in E4, some kid like this was when like Charizard was like 20,000 or something, and then he was like auctioning. His parents like bought him the Charizard, and then like he did like an auction raffle, and like each ticket was like $1,000. I think I'm not exactly sure how it played off, but like basically you paid him $1,000. Like some kid that you've never met before who had absolutely no like history in the hobby whatsoever. And he would supposedly put you in a raffle, and one person for the low price of $1,000 entry had the chance to win the $20,000 Charizard. Just don't don't do those. Don't do those types of raffles, because you don't know, unless you're just like some like reputable person who's gonna like do things on camera live for thousands of people to watch and dissect, like over the internet, and everything can be micro analyzed to the finest atom. um, don't trust random kid on Instagram basically to hold a raffle for you.
I mean, raffles, waffles. I mean, people are just, it makes no sense. There's so many dumb criminals out there. You literally have people on a live stream with a video opening a pack and then swapping the card out like mid pack. Like that, I feel like I see so many videos that coming out. And it's like, years ago, people had this trust in all these people. And it's like, there's no one monitoring their ethics. Like, there's no one there. Like I've been in the hobby a long time and try to keep a pretty flawless record. I try to be 100% referenceable with everyone. And it's really hard to do one mistake and you're done. And you have these people that like there's no one that's holding them accountable. There's no regulatory body. There's no slot machine that sort of has to do a certain payout. It's like you're just hoping that this dude just doesn't take your money, and it really blows my mind. I mean, I did a lot of box breaks back in 2015 for sports, and the pull rates were not that good. I lost a lot of money doing that, and I got to the point that I was doing sports kind of on the side and stuff. Life was good kind of at that point, and I got to the point I was like, I'm walking away with nothing. Like I haven't pulled anything. It's not worth anything. And I look back at sort of the value I had versus what I put into it, or getting a team or this or that. And it just it made no sense. And I think the people I was doing it with were absolutely ethical, but the payout and all that stuff just it was the addiction that fueled that. And I wish that if the addiction wasn't there, I feel like I would have probably skipped a lot of those bad decisions.
Yeah, I like your you talked about, you always talk about being 100% referenceable, and you can do 1,000 deals, and if you just mess with one of them, it's just
Yeah.
this entire, we talked about this before. This hobby is so big, but if you do one thing to screw someone over, and it's actually they have like a legitimate beef with you,
Mm-hmm.
many of those doors in the future they just close immediately to do deals, because we deals happen in all sorts of fashions. We have goods and services, friends and family, crypto, cash, meet up in person. Um, if you have a stink on you, a lot of those options close, and you just want to make sure that you keep all those options open to you at all times.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say names here, but one of the top five, probably most trusted people, I think a lot of people would say, had something happen earlier this year. And it wasn't even a big item, it was a small item, but it was a little tweak in integrity that just was public. And it's like I haven't heard from him in a number of months. It's like we actually planned a trip next year where he was going to be included with a few other good friends. And it's like that one slip of integrity just crumbled everything. This friend had gone to a card show that a lot of people go to every week, several times a week, and essentially went to a dealer that he always deals with. and looked at cards for a little bit, this and that, kind of was asking about prices, this and that. And, it's again, a very, very trusted person. It's someone that ultimately you would let behind your booth, you'd let in your house, like go down the hall, go to the bathroom, leave him in your card room. You trust him. It's someone that a lot of people would unequivocally trust just all around. And ultimately, he'd spent a little bit of time at the card booth, and he's trying to figure out what cards he wanted. And he kind of he had his backpack on the table. He kind of positioned in a weird way, and lo and behold, ultimately he decided to maybe get a card, but not get a card, and he ended up with a few extra cards in his backpack. But when you look at sort of how it all played out, it just seemed like there was something nefarious. It seemed like there wasn't something right. And then he ended up leaving the card booth. He had the cards, and the card shop, basically like they took a benefit of doubt. They said, "Oh, we must have messed up. Oh, what's going on? Let's figure this out." They went back and looked at the camera. They found out he put it in his bag and he walked away. And kind of the truth part here is they called him out on it, and they said, "Hey, let's make this right. You got to come back. Like, why'd you steal?" And the friend, he admitted to it. He said, "I don't know why I did it. I just had to do it. It just had to do it." And it's something that's like, but why? It wasn't a $20,000 card or $30,000 card. It wasn't, it was a card that was like $300 to $500 at a booth that there were many other options that were there. And so it's like, was it the thrill? Was it this, that? Was it someone that just has to steal? Or it's kind of crushing because it's such a small decision, but that decision, it just meant so much sort of to the impact. And, what other positions had he been in? And I know he'd been at one of my friends' houses that has a lot of stuff that doesn't let anyone come over. And he'd been there, the last like couple weeks before this happened. And it's like once trust is broken, it's so hard to get back. And, it's one of the most important things with any relationship.
All right, so now that we passed the depressing section of the podcast, I want to move into my favorite section of our podcast, which is Collector's Corner, so we can liven things up a little bit. So, considering that this is our 7th podcast, I decided that 7, gambling, lotto, I decided to bring a lottery card, which I do own a lot of different variants. I'm going to bring out one that probably the majority of our viewers are familiar with, and that is the P Promo Lotto Zard, which I have a lot of copies of. Full transparency, I have a lot of copies of this card. I actually recently auctioned one of these off at PWCC. At the height, this card was sitting at about $8,000 with buyer's premium. Dropped slightly with everything else in the hobby cooling off. We're sitting around like 3,000 for this card. I bought all these cards around the 350. My buyout price basically for these cards were $350 to $400 when they're coming out, and it's first off, the artwork is absolutely beautiful. It is the only way to get this card in a holo is this Japanese promo one. You can get it in the reverse holo in Expedition, but to get that full beautiful holo background, the Japanese one is the only way to get. I think even though the majority of people understand what this card is, I still think that it's pretty undervalued at $3,000 because based on brief history of how this was handed out, you had to buy 3 starter decks in Japan, attach proof of purchase of the starter decks to a postcard, mail that into Pokemon, and then what happened was there were 2 separate lotteries. There was one which was the red and green lottery, because in Japan when the game came out, the versions were red and green. When they came to America, they transitioned the versions to red and blue, and basically, or you could have got the gold and silver lottery package, which contained the Johto starters. With the original 3 of the Charizard, the Blastoise, as well as the Venusaur, obviously those are going to hold a little bit more of a premium just on the fact that they are more popular species. They're a part of the 151, and then Charizard being one of the more sought after cards in the hobby. Only 5,000 copies awarded in total. 5,000 sounds a lot, but in terms of like a TCG, 5,000 is not a lot considering how much would grade 10 would remain mint. I don't want to try to, like, I'm blowing this up because I own a lot of them, full transparency. But when you talk about Ponto Pikachus and like Munch Pikachus, those cards have 1,000 PSA 10 examples already just by themselves. And if you just take like, there's only 5,000 copies in total of this card. Prices still seem a little bit low to me. That's why I probably would not send another one to auction. I'll just sit on the rest of my collection because I do think that they're a little bit undervalued. Beautiful Nishida artwork, that whimsical artwork that we all know and love. And it's just a great card. It's one, some people would argue this is the best looking Charizard in the entire hobby. It's up there with me. I wouldn't say it's my favorite one, but it's definitely top 3 up there.
Good old Nishida artwork, and I think 5,000 is not a whole lot, especially when Tetra owns 1,000 of them. I mean, jeez, like pop control, supply control,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I truly think that's like one of the most beautiful cards. Like to me, in my head, I always think like the teenage Charizard. It's like kind of in that preteen sort of phase, and it's just kind of playful, fun to go. Like he's about to wrestle, roll around, like make a mess of the kitchen or whatever. And then the other Charizard and Expeditions, like the granddaddy Charizard with like the long like snout and it's flying. And I do not like the number 6, like the hollow Charizard and Expedition. But then you have this like Nishida artwork, and it's just so beautiful. Like it's literally like one of my favorite Charizards, just because of the pose, like kind of the detail and everything. It just, I mean, the artwork alone, I think supports a lot of the value. Let alone there's only 5,000 or 4,000 available.
No. So you have this card as the baby Charizard. You have the Expedition number 6 as the granddad. So is the Sky Race Charizard like the teen, middle age, kind of like peak performance Charizard?
That's peak athlete, baby. That's NFL contract. That's signing bonus number 1 and 2. I mean, that's was that 10, 20K card?
That's like mid season form, right? That Charizard.
Mm-hmm. He's ready for a re-up on his contract, man.
What do you got? What do you got for me, Zach, this week?
So today, because I was traveling, I wanted to grab a really, really special card. This is a card I've been working on for 2 years, trying to negotiate, trying to figure out a deal for. And one of my good friends has owned it, and I was able to essentially come to terms and pick it up. This is the 1996 Cora Pikachu, and it's glossy. So it's basically the first version, the 96 sort of artwork, I guess you could say, in a PSA 9. So all the glossy cards, you peel them from a sheet. They're super hard to peel. And what makes this card especially rare, especially hard to find, is while this is sort of the 1996 artwork, the first Pokemon card that ever came out, this card in particular came out in 1998. And so why is that? Well, the 96 Pikachu of this, when they first released it, had a Ken Sugimori as the illustrator. Well, Ken Sugimori didn't illustrate this card. Surprise, surprise. Kind Kombuchi did. So what Pokemon did, now that we're going lottery, cards here for episode 7, they only made 3,000. I believe it's 3,000 of these. You got me all mixed up my numbers now. 3,000 of these, and they were distributed via mail, via lottery, and you had to peel the card as well too. And so I think we had a friend that bought a beat up or played copy for maybe like 3,500 like a few months ago. So even just finding this card with the corrected illustrator at the bottom is so difficult. But to get it in the PSA 9 grade, or the CGC 9 grade, which is the highest grade that I'm aware of, is literally surreal. It's going to my core set, the collection, and just to get a copy of it was a goal. To get a 9 is like even cooler. So again, friends, relationships, the hobby. I keep saying relationships. It's literally the reason this happened. So thank you so much for helping me complete a goal.
Those peel cards are just like notoriously, they're just always off centered, right?
Well, the back can be off center, but also you could peel the back could be well centered, but you peel a well centered back and the front's off center.
Yeah,
it's like you got back and front. I mean, I know you like the front, but the back tells a story. The final section of today's podcast is where you get to ask Nick and Zach questions. And so if you leave a comment in this video, it could be included in the next podcast. And so, Steven, I say Kisun.
Okay,
I'm
exotic.
So sorry, man.
It's exotic. Don't worry.
It's exotic. Ooh, I love it. He's got an exotic question here. What do you guys think is the upper limit of the Scream in Mario Pika? So I think that's a very interesting question. Obviously, the Scream cards are super hot right now. I think we were talking about like a 9K Mimikyu offer that is like, is it real? Is it not real? It's like, what could the Pikas hit? And so it's one of those things that like when I think of like the Burning Shadows, like Rainbow Zard, when that first came out, and the pop was so high and the price just kept going up and up and up. It's like, where are all these cards going? Like where are they? I mean, obviously it's a modern card that's a lot of sort of quantity out there, but it's like, who's collecting these? Who's hoarding these? And so I kind of take that first analogy when that first started hit me and relate to the Screen Pikas. There's a lot out there. I mean, you could literally buy them for $20 when they first came out. For probably a year or so after, as many as you wanted. Like, you just hop online, as many as you want
They're
for 20
free.
bucks.
They're free giveaways.
Yeah. And so it's like what's the upper limit? Like, I mean, I think given a long enough time horizon, the upper limit could be pretty high. But at the same time, it's like there's so much potential to drive that price down, to suppress that price, to push it down, that it's hard for me to say that, because like, even saying a price higher than today's price just feels like a bad decision if you want to buy it. Like, I would say wait a little bit. I think sometime between now and the next 3 years, the price of the Pika will be lower than what it's at today. It just doesn't make sense given how many were printed and how available they have traditionally been. So I don't even want to give a price. I think for the Mario Pika, it's a very similar story, but that's always been a little less available. The price jumped up right away. I mean, I can see Mario Pika staying 10K for a long time. I can see Screen Pika 3 to 5K probably seems more fair given the pop. For it to really have growth, you need to have a lot more growth across the hobby. Like so many things need to go up for like Screen Pika to be 20K, in my opinion.
I think that in terms of relative speaking, we're at the ceiling for those cards right now. Obviously, as time goes by, just like everything in this hobby, the prices will steadily increase. I don't see a massive jump or spike in those prices just because, like Zach said, I think we've noted the PSA 10 population on all those cards already. They're sitting at like 1,000. Like we understanding core fundamentals of this hobby, supply and demand, rarity, age, availability. I guess that's rarity as well. It just the prices. I don't see much more of a ceiling. So if you're hanging on those cards right now, expecting like a massive jump, I would. We've said this before with those specific cards. Sell into the hype right now. Then maybe you could repurchase those cards if you have something else in mind. We saw someone in the comment box, they sold off all their popular Pikachus to pay for their tickets to Worlds, which is absolutely fantastic. I think that the experience of traveling is something that you're never gonna forget, and I think it's honestly a good time to unload those Poncho Pikachus. I personally myself are considering unloading my Poncho Pikachus right now as well, but it's whatever. It's kind of I don't have anything else that I want to buy right now, so just kind of yeah. Unless I have something else to buy, I don't want to do it. All right, so the next question wasn't really a question, but kind of a question that a person left in the comment box of the last video, because we talked about storing cards in safety security boxes and all that type of stuff. Worst Player NA basically asked, why not use home collector's insurance instead of storage boxes for your cards? That way you can enjoy your cards at home. You don't have to go to the bank, withdraw them. So I'm going to leave this first because I actually went through the process in Canada of going through trying to get home collector's insurance. In all honesty, it's a gigantic pain in the butt, honestly, to have collector's insurance on all your cards, because you have to first off inventory everything, inventory everything, and if you're a collector, you're constantly adding to your inventory all the time. So that makes things a little bit dicey. What happens if, God forbid, something happens to a new card that you didn't originally account for or accounted for in your estimation of your collectibles? And honestly, it's so expensive. It's not like I talked about last week, like people shouldn't be cheap in this hobby, and like you just invest in good things for storage and all that type of stuff. But insurance, like storage boxes, are literally like less than 1% of what actual insurance costs. So it's just more economical to use storage boxes if you can get enough of them. I run into the problem with the place where I store. I'm not crazy. I'm like storing like at different banks. No, I have one bank, what that bank is, I'm never gonna tell you. But I have one bank. That way, I can always just like go to the same place to get all my cards. But yeah, it's just so much more economical. And also, like, we live in like a dangerous time of like doxing and like people knowing where you live, and you just don't want to open yourself up to people knowing that you have like a bunch of really expensive cards at your home. It's just not a good business proposition. I love the fact and the idea of being able to, at your whim, being able to just go into your safe. God, I hope you have a safe if you're collecting these type of cards, or whatever you're storing your card in your panic room or whatever, and being able to just like revisit it and experience them all the time. But you have to keep in mind, I have a wife. I feel like I would be putting her in some sort of danger having these types of cards in the house at all times. Um, yeah, it's just trying to mitigate risk, and why open yourself up to a bad situation if you don't have to, and if it's cheaper to use a storage box.
Yeah, I think this is a good main topic as well. Maybe even have a few guests or something chime in as well that have been through it. I do want to point out that he said home collectors insurance. So traditional home insurance, there's a sort of a limit on the collectibles. It's actually really hard to get collectibles insured through traditional, like just home insurance. And so if you actually have a collector's insurance or something like that, it's a little bit easier. And then if you're buying and selling, you have things going in out the door. There's all these avenues to protect things and kind of get the right package. And then when you go up to a certain rate, a certain level, they sort of cap out, and those fees are actually pretty high at those levels. And so I actually just try not to keep a whole lot at home, like whatsoever. Like it's peace of mind. No one's gonna break into the bank. I mean, if they do, like that, it'd be the first time. I don't know. It feels weird. And I know Tetra keeps his cards at the Bank of England, in the vault down, in London. Well, I didn't mean to say that. I'm sorry. But for me, I mean, I have all these strategies that just sort of help mitigate risk, and one of those is just don't keep a whole lot at home, and so that literally just helps me peace of mind. And it's I think there is kind of a longer topic for it, but um, I kind of also have a future goal to like have sort of a future where there is a house with more security and this and that, where you can keep more at home. And maybe if life is good enough that I could get that higher level of insurance, that I'd feel safe enough to do that. I guess our last question here, PSA 1 collector, are there still Pokemon cards or products related to the TCG hidden in the wild that are undiscovered or long forgotten by like everyone? Like so forgotten, nobody else talks about it. That's a great question.
So we had so just like forgotten cards. A couple of the snap cards were no copies have ever surfaced. Like the snap Magikarp, people thought that was lost in like an earthquake. Like the owner was in like the tragedy of those earthquakes that happened like decades ago. So that's why those cards never surfaced. But lo and behold, the snap Magikarp eventually did show up on the market. And then we talked about the Snap Pikachu, the first one that has ever appeared in the wild that is now in the Dubsy collection. Just showed up recently. One of the cooler cards that kind of surfaced during the time when I was outside of the hobby that Zach probably knows a lot about is the Proto Blastoise. So that's a really interesting card that I don't know how many people like. If you have to like be pretty deep into the hobby to like kind of be up to date with that, or you just weren't in touch. So you want to talk about the Proto Blastoise for a bit? I feel like it's a really good card to talk about.
The Protostoys.
The Protostoise, yeah.
Ooh, man, it just has a little ring to it.
For our new viewers, can you kind of give just like a synopsis of what the Protozoice is all about?
So I'll give a quick overview. I got to give a few kind of side points as well. The Protostoys is basically considered from the people who shared it to be one of the first Pokemon cards ever sort of printed in the United States. And so the Protostoys is a Magic the Gathering back, so black borders, Magic the Gathering back, and then the front is essentially the CD promo Blastoise in English, holographic without the Galaxy holofoil. It has like a mirror holofoil on it. So different holofoil. The text is a little different. The font's a little different. But the CD promo Blastoise was never printed in English. And so it's literally like one of the first cards that Pokemon sort of came out. It's one of the cards that was out at the time, the 1998 CD promo. And so again, Pokemon was trying to figure all this stuff out in English in 1998. They printed it on a Magic the Gathering sheet because that's what Wizards of the Coast printed all the time. They were Magic the Gathering since Alpha came out as one of their first sets. And so it makes a lot of sense that this would be one of the first cards they test. Why they picked Blastoise or Charizard or Pikachu, I don't know. But they picked Blastoise. And ultimately, they had some provenance with a few different people. They've had a few people look at it and say, hey, this is authentic. This came from Wizards of the Coast sheet. It looks like the right sort of thing. CDC graded it, which makes it sort of an iconic sort of piece. But again, the point is there may be other things out there we aren't aware of. And one of the biggest challenges for me with the Protostoys is the people who helped authenticate it also had some sort of financial incentive with it too. And I always, always, always try to separate the financial incentive from sort of the authentication piece or from sort of the other piece. That's why Rick from Pawn Stars, when Gary comes on, has a Pokemon expert on. Gary's a Pokemon expert, but you have to have a third party. You have to have someone who has no say or no sort of position. And the only thing that irked me about the Protostoys was the people who kind of helped authenticate it were to financially benefit from it.
I see. When I initially when the card first appeared in the wild and I saw it firsthand, I was like, this can't be a real card. This is not. This looks like some janky made in China like fabrication because the font is all weird. It does not match any sort of font Pokemon has ever used before. It had the text were different sizes. And it was just like I thought it was like I thought this I like laughed at first. I thought this is like the biggest hoax I've ever seen, and then it got graded, and I was like, oh my god. And then I just thought of like, do you know what that sold for? I think it went to auction, right? Or was it sold privately?
So there were, two versions of the Protostoys. One had a white back, sort of used as a marketing proof. Apparently there were two of them, and the rest had a Magic the Gathering pack. The one that was a white back that actually had less layers and was a little more flimsy, that went I think for like $360,000. And then the ones with the Magic back, they went in the mid $200,000 range. And then shortly after the five sort of came out CGC, another one popped up that actually hit the high grade. It was higher. It was graded higher than all the others. I think it might have been like an 8 or an 8.5 or something. And I think that went privately for like 220K because it was a Facebook post for someone I was like watching at the time. And he's like, first person to pay 220K gets it. And it sold like within like a couple hours. It's like, geez, like who just got that ready? Like, okay, sure. It's like, yeah. So fun times, man.
Yeah, that's it was definitely something that almost drew me back into the hobby when I was taking my break. But it was just like absolutely crazy. Yeah, because you have this huge like cross collectors. You have your Pokemon collectors and you have your Magic collectors. Two of the like biggest TCGs in the entire world. It's just I was yeah, two sounds about right to me. It's just I wasn't sure about the pricing because I wasn't in the hobby. But that also brings me back to another story. Like the majority of like obviously we had the Protozoice, which was a quote unquote English card. But I find like the majority of the stuff that goes undiscovered or like people have forgotten about for a while is mostly just comes out of Japan. You have the DPT DP DTP slash P. It's the Darkrai and the as well as the Cresselia promos that for a long time people thought didn't exist. There's two versions of them. You had the more common one, which were like Daisuke promos, I think, and then you had like these ones that were actually never officially issued. I think Mason has our friend Can't Be Cards. He was the first person to find these cards, and they're the only two graded copies that exist in the world right now. I think they're sitting in a vault at PWCC because I see them occasionally pop up when I'm going through the PWCC vault. So like for the longest time, people thought like those cards didn't exist whatsoever, and also brings me back to like a story of how the Rumble cards for the Rumble cards got actually graded. So for a long time, there was like this set of Rumble cards that were basically like lottery cards. Hey, theme of this episode, lottery cards that popped up. So our friend Mosen, only collectibles, he wanted to get a set graded, but there was basically no provenance or example of these cards in the hobby before. because they basically had never showed up before. And what he actually did, he actually edited the Bubblepedia page and added that Bubblepedia, added the cards to Bubblepedia, and then PSA used like that Bubblepedia article to kind of like authenticate the cards and like basically prove their existence. And it's just kind of it's basically kind of like submitting like an essay, like something off Wikipedia for your like thesis for like university or something like that. It's kind of sketchy, but they are real cards. But for a long time, none of them have ever shown up because there's only 100 copies of them ever issued. So yeah, I find like the majority of the more obscure stuff that people have never seen before generally comes out of Japan, just because Japan, they do so many promos, they do amazing promos. Um, but I find that's more like older cards. I think we live now in the age of social media. People are constantly sharing images. People are constantly sharing stuff that, for the most part, anything new that comes out instantly gets shared online. But some of the older vintage stuff, I think that once in a while we get a couple of gems that pop out.
Yeah, I think you had great points. I was thinking about a card I may have thought of, and they're all like Japanese, like you were saying. I'm like, oh, they are Japanese. You kind of start thinking about it a little bit, but I think the one card I would say is a 008P promo.
Yeah.
I forget, is it Tropical Wind or Tropical? I think it's Tropical Wind. But ultimately, it was like given out a lottery. I think there's like only 8 copies or 10 copies, or I think it's like 8. But there's very very few. But it's like literally like Tetra was saying earlier with the Darkrai and stuff. It's a card in a set of promos. It has a number in the set to complete the set. You have to have that card. And this 008P, like 008/P, basically like you can't complete the P promo set without it. But they only made 8 copies of it. So like even just it doesn't matter if you get a 10 or a 9 or a 5, like just to get the card so hard. And when I go to Worlds in Japan, getting that card is actually my goal. So if I could find that, like, oh my god, we did it. To see it would be a dream. To buy it is probably not possible.
Well, do you know, like, other than the one that Scott owns, like,
Mm-hmm.
is there any like, you know of like any other buyers who actually have that card right now, or
uh,
collectors?
I know 2 others have surfaced. One person had one that was graded a little harsh, and it popped up last year around Worlds in London. Online, it wasn't in London, but while we're at Worlds, and we kind of
Hmm.
talked, like, yeah, I thought that was kind of a hard grade. It actually looked pretty clean, and that collector actually cracked it out and got a better grade. So I think the price he bought it for actually just went up way more than that I think it sold. And so I know of like 3 or so that have surfaced, but I mean, for the others to surface, I mean, it's been out for so long. Like, who's to say it wasn't thrown away, or in a storm, or and like you just have no idea. And even with extra copies, like it's one of those cards that's like a lot of people aren't going to see unless you look at Scott's eBay listing.
So you're telling me like someone didn't pull like one of like Mindy's friends who left his versus trainer deck at the table and just threw away $120,000.
It's probably like, what is this card like? I don't know. Who knows?
that
Yeah,
that like that story just like absolutely guts me.
just want to keep having the stories happen, man. No, not the bad ones, but I just want more pokey stories. I love hearing pokey stories all the time.
All right, so this has been a podcast with a lot of highs and lows, some depressing stories, as well as some very happy stories, interesting stories, and that's episode 7 of the Next Gen TCG podcast. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. As always, if you guys have any questions, leave them in the comment box below for next week's podcast. Oh, before we go, we actually got since Zach, since we started the podcast, we've had a lot of positive feedback, and Zach was actually bought some stuff off of a seller who sent a nice little bonus in his package of saying that he enjoyed the podcast, and I saw it and it just instantly made me smile. So big shout out to our fans out there who are enjoying this podcast. I like making them; they're very fun to do. I like talking to Zach about Pokemon, and I thank you everyone for your tremendous support thus far.
Thank you so much. Reading the notes, it literally like makes our day. I read it in the middle of a busy day, and I was like, I smiled. I was like, oh my god, this is so cool. And it just the love and everything, and just thank you so much. And can't wait to see where we are next year. Next episode. It's like life is fast.
Awesome. So we'll see you guys next week.
See you guys. got a question for you that can't be recorded.
Oh, this?
Assume it's hockey, but I know you had a big day yesterday, so